All right, here we are. And I am very pleased to welcome Professor Justin Kennedy to our show today. Thank you for joining us for 50 Hitting 50, Justin.
Oh, it's really exciting to be here, Deirdre. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I'm actually very excited
hmm
about this conversation because you and I have obviously talked a lot over the last few months about various things. And as an experienced pentagenarian, are you 52 now? Or
I don't like to talk about it, but I'm actually
okay,
50.
sorry.
I'm actually 53. I turned 53 in January.
Ah, okay. Well, that's great. Actually, this is where we're going to start then. When you were approaching this milestone birthday, which is, it's quite a thing for a lot of people. What were your thoughts about it? Was it welcome? Was it unwelcome? Where were you in your mind for that?
My mind was a bit funky at the time. I just had a huge seizure, Deirdre, so I was still in the recovery phase. We just moved to Deirdre, so it really was a change of life, if you know
Mm,
that phrase for women. Um, so the experience was very complicated for me, geographically, emotionally. But going through that time, I suppose the the thing that happened in my mind is that I I realized that I'm never going to be an Olympian, and I say that, with half tongue in cheek, but there's that kind of niggle in the back that you always think, you stand a chance, not seriously, but, you always, I always let that idea, I'm never going to play for the national football team. I'm never going to be, so this is the kind of rhetoric that came to be conscious. So I
mm,
never like sat around thinking, oh, whatever. But there is a quote from um, the Muslim tradition is that, I don't know how it goes exactly, but it is, when you get to heaven, everybody is 30. Okay. And I'm sure I'm, um, you know, destroying it, whatever it means, or
mm,
the original meaning is. But when you get to 50, you realize you're nowhere near 30 anymore. So that was the
mm,
the insight, which I'm sure everybody has it, but that was the short version of my experience, if that
mm.
makes sense from my personal vantage.
Well, yeah, it does. I mean, that's a really complex picture that you've painted. And if let's take it back a little bit then. So at 25, at 30, did you have an idea of what you would be like at 50? Were you going to be that Olympian, or, could you picture what 50 was even?
I was quite looking forward to being older, to tell the truth. It was my daughter always laughs at me and says, "No, you always wanted to be grey," and I'm saying to her, be careful what you wish for, because I'm not going very grey, but it's on its way. So um, I kind of like the idea of being the the wise, uh, you know distinguished professor, which never really happened. You know, I've got some academic niches in my belt, but it's not like you arrive and you are this thing.
Mm,
So I suppose there's an interesting conversation around imposter syndrome, which we can get lost in for a second if you're up for it. But
hmm
by the time you get to around about this age, the the imposter stuff really comes up, because you've got stuff behind your name. You've got experience. You've got um, a body of expertise. I mean, it might not be very expert level, but it is a body of expertise, whatever you want to call it, a body of experience. But at the same time, you've spent your life, I spent my life, challenging and doubting and trying a lot.
Hmm.
And by the time you get here, you think, oh, really? Is this it? You know? So there's all these, for me, there's all these, this double talk or the self-talk, if you like.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of it is what I've described so far. A lot of it is negative, but there's also a lot of positive or not negative. If I
Hmm.
don't get too carried away being positive, you know, you take you can take the I can take the edge
Mm.
off that that performance issue.
Mm. Hmm.
I mean, I don't think I'm taking the issue off, but it's a different kind of style of being in the world. I think that's
Yeah.
the best
Yeah.
way of putting it.
Yeah, this has actually come up a lot, various people who've been on different episodes up to now have talked about this in different ways, and some of them actually think, it's almost like this arriving at this stage, this kind of 50 milestone, has given some people confidence. But I,
Mm,
it's almost like, okay, yeah, I've done it for this long, and there's a book. I don't know if you've ever come across it. A book called "Nobody Knows What They're Doing." It's by an artist or a designer called Lee Crutchley, and it's just one of these books that just kind of reveals to us all that we're just making it up as we go along.
I
We're doing
love
our
that. I
best.
love that. You must send me the link or I'll remember it.
I
But
would,
it's such a
yeah.
great title, isn't it?
I know, and the other side of it then that came up is that, of course, when we were kids, we looked to our parents and we thought that they must know everything because they
Yeah,
made the
yeah.
decisions and they gave us the guidance. But now we're that age and we're going, hang on a second, maybe they didn't really know what they were doing.
Mm,
Maybe they were making it up too. It's just that, we took the authority for what it was at the time.
yeah. I mean, it's sure. There's such a trove of content to speak around that, Deirdre.
Mm,
I I think there's a huge change in the way that children see their parents. I think we slash I, our generation, had a much more patriarchal system where the father pulled out the strap if you were wrong, and the mother made the sandwiches, all that kind of stuff. But I'd love to know what this generation is going to do at their 50s, because I mean, here's a quick story. So I'm doing math homework with my son, and he is so good at all the sciences. He really is, and well, I'm not, and good. I'm not good at math in neuroscience. So he says, can you help me with this question to answer? And it was like some long division, which was impossible.
mm,
I can't even remember how to do that stuff. And he said, so what is the answer? So I said, well, let's work it out together. And I went to Chat GPT to get the answer because I didn't know what to do. And I got the answer, and Chat GPT, hallucinated and gave me some wrong number. And he said to me, I think you're actually wrong. Anyway, I can tell you the rest of the story. It doesn't matter. But it's that ability for
mm,
children to challenge their
yeah.
parents when they're wrong. We didn't have, slash, my generation didn't have that luxury or that
Mm,
opportunity. So when we were growing up, we had this pedestal that we put our parents on,
mm,
and for probably a good reason. That pedestal seems to be shrinking. So it'll be great to have this conversation when we're 100, Deirdre, to see what the next generation have done when they're 50, if if that even if that's a
mm.
possibility, huh?
Yeah, and actually, I was reading the other day that so many more of us are expected to reach that age, and that, of course,
Mm,
means that we have to plan differently. We have to think differently about so many things, including how we
mm,
look after ourselves. Because if we're going to have that length of a lifespan, then we need quality of life to go with it.
mm, mm.
So,
Uh,
just if I can draw it back to something that is really a conversation that only you and I can have, because other guests won't have this kind of shared experience. But can I ask when it was that you came to neuroscience?
I suppose the simplest answer is post emergence from a coma. I was obviously very, punch drunk recovering, and it took a long time to learn to talk and walk and control my feelings. But the experience goes that I was really trying to walk in
Mm,
occupational therapy, and I realized that my brain isn't doing what my mind wants it to do. So I
mm,
started having this like epiphany thing. There's a difference. The
mm,
mechanics and the driving, or the difference between the noun of the brain and the verb of the mind doing stuff was different. It was,
mm,
it was a bit of an epiphany. So I was studying psychology before the accident, and I obviously didn't finish that degree. But I got interested in the application of neuroscience, and well, the rest is history.
mm,
The rest isn't history. The rest is my lifelong curiosity to really understand what the brain does
mm,
comparison to the mind,
mm,
because we like to think we have a locus of control over our feelings, our intentions, our behavior, and a lot of it isn't. I don't know if you've
mm.
read that new book by Robert Sapolsky, Deirdre, called Determined.
It's kind of opened, and we've gone through some of it, but it's not. It remains unfinished.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a book. I mean, obviously it is a book, but I don't think if the topic is a book, because, saying that we're determined, it's kind of like a sentence. Maybe you can justify it through the lens of science, but when you hear that and you look at the neurology of what is determinism, it's pretty depressing.
Mm,
And when you start researching neuroscience, things like neuroplasticity become very interesting.
mm,
And that gives you a sense that you can reboot the machine, you can fine tune the violin,
mm.
you can do stuff. And if it is all determined, what the friggin' point? Which I'm sure that is a conversation we can have with Sapolsky at another point. Um,
If you're
because
listening,
you
Robert, talk to us.
exactly. But the point is, if your motivation and your choices are determined, you would have chosen to build your neuroplasticity anyway. So if you
Mm,
choose or not choose, that is already determined. So it doesn't make a difference. So you might as well choose, because so you get like into this loop of
yeah,
of,
it's quite
of
nihilistic.
illogic. Exactly. You get lost in the illogical loop, if that's a phrase.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. In all the things that you have learned and been exposed to through your
Hmm.
studies and your research and whatnot, what are the things that have changed the way you live?
I know this sounds flippant, but I live more mindfully.
Mm,
Um, Maybe that's a byproduct of age. I think it is to some degree. But when I have the feeling that I can do something
mm,
about my brain, it's
mhm,
quite nice. You feel that you've got some locus of control, as I suggested.
mm,
And if you can get stronger or lose weight or improve your style of dialogue.
mhm,
And I got very much interested in the coaching discipline around this time, because I was interested in improving rather than getting lost in post traumatic recovery therapy
mm,
kind of stuff. Even though that was part of my journey for definitely, but interest was in the future, said
Mm-hmm.
said Darth Vader. And the thinking, Deirdre, is, what can I do differently?
Mm.
And a lot of it is around health for me, especially lately, because as I mentioned, I've been having, recent seizures a couple of times a year, not often, but often enough, to be in medication. So, with
Mm.
that daunting cloud of having a seizure, I tend to not uh, be so flippant
Mm.
about my health.
Mm-hmm.
Try be more responsible. So I think responsibility is a key thing that
Yeah.
comes in. Um, yeah,
Mm.
I think I've always been quite energetic and quite sporty, um, but with nutrition and alcohol, those have been a big learning. And another thing that I've really found interesting is the neurological impact of social experience.
Mm.
And that is so interesting to look at how your biome is influenced by the people you hang out with, by the
Mm.
dogs you pet, and the things you do.
Mm.
In Germany here, people wash their hands incessantly, and you go to someone's house and you take off your shoes and you wash your hands, and I I intuitively believe that influences the relationship. I mean, what I really know neurologically around that, I haven't done any thinking or research on that, but I think that is part of the communication, if you like.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is really interesting actually, because we're even in that action, that the washing the hands of something. I mean, we have there's a metaphor for that, isn't
There's Jesus in there somewhere, isn't it?
there? But yeah, it's also like, we are preempting that something bad will happen from this interaction. We are, so concerned about just avoiding all
It's so
negative
interesting
outcomes.
to speak about the cultural bias of different cultures. My experience is this is almost like I don't want to bring my dirt into your house. Who knows what it really means? I haven't really thought about it in a similar way, but different cultures have different
Hmm.
rituals, and what where I'm going with this, I think, is how these rituals of culture not only inform but kind of dictate the way we show up, which
Mm.
brings us back to Robert, dare I say. Um, but
All roads lead to Robert today.
exactly. So how much control do we have? If you grow up in India, the likelihood of you learning English as your first language is zero, etc.
Well, let's loop back a minute and let's look at understanding a bit more about our brains and the choices and responsibilities that come with
Hmm.
that. Because I love that, and I think that it is something that it does create so much more freedom and so many more choices. But those choices then give us
Mm.
um, different, yeah, responsibilities is probably the best word for it. We
Mm.
know that we have the choice, and therefore we can choose what to do about a certain situation. We can choose to go along in our previous tracks and do things the same way, or we can choose something new.
All roads lead back to nutrition in this conversation loop, which really isn't the full picture. Of
Mm,
course, what you eat has a huge impact on your mood and on your well-being, etc. But it's not the full picture, and there's lots of information around how the the gut brain axis functions together. And I think as we learn more about nutrition, that will become more and more
Mm.
valuable.
Mm.
But it's difficult to discipline your mind to learn how to think differently. Did you follow that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I watched a YouTube video yesterday while doing the dishes or whatever I was doing. And so I was half watching it. And it was Lex Friedman. I don't know if you ever watch his stuff, but Lex Friedman is, he's, I think he's a Russian Jew who graduated with a PhD from MIT. I don't know where he is, it doesn't matter. But he was interviewing this guy on AI, and he said that the thing that AI doesn't do is hierarchical. How
Mm.
do you say it? Hierarchical.
Yes, that's it. I think that's it.
Hierarchical or hierarchical? Hierarchical. It doesn't matter.
Hierarchical.
Hierarchical. Clearly, linguistically, I'm struggling here. But AI doesn't do hierarchical thinking, whereas obviously we do. That's his whole point.
Huh,
And
that's really interesting.
yeah, and as a hierarchical thinking, as a hierarchical thinker, my
Mm.
position myself amongst the humans is saying, hierarchical thinking is that we solve problems on top of problems. So we've got a hierarchy of
Yes.
problem solving. And he
Mm.
says, obviously AI will get there one day because it's growing exponentially. But for the moment, the hierarchical problem solving is very energy heavy on the brain. It's very demanding to
Mm.
to do that. Solving problems so that you can solve other problems, which in turn, it gets a bit heavy cognitively.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, this is one of the things that I've been giving some thought to recently is that, part of how we ended up where we are in kind of environmental terms and so on is
Mm.
that we only solve the problem that we need to solve right now without having any regard to the problems that will create down the line. So I don't know if that is a different version of problems on top of problems or if it's a flip side to it.
I don't know if I understand the question. Sorry.
Okay, so we have this tendency. Well, we're going way off off topic here, so we probably better
No, I
tie it
mean,
back.
I'll bring it back to being 50 in a second. I've got a point. I've got a
Okay,
point to loop back in.
you go, you go.
So the point is that when you are young,
Mm.
you do this kind of thinking helter skelter. You're all
Mm.
over the place, and as you school your thinking so that you can solve more problems, you get to build specific pathways.
Mm.
And as the brain ages, these paths become concrete highways, and
Mm.
it's difficult to find a little country lane to
Yeah.
get to the kitchen when you've got a concrete highway where you can do it blindfolded. So
Mm.
the the aging brain, which starts a lot younger than 50, but we all believe, I don't know, I believe that old age begins at 50.
Mm.
And that could be a hangover from my historical experience, but I don't feel
Mm.
old. I
Yeah.
really, I still don't find any symptoms of age other than, um, obviously there's symptoms, but I don't feel, and I'm sure most people don't. Maybe it's a good question to ask your guests. Do you feel 50? And
Haven't had anyone feeling what they think 50 should feel like so far.
so, it's a great ego question, isn't it? Do I feel 50? Well, you're not going to say, of course, I'm young at heart, even if I'm having a bypass.
I mean,
So,
there were days definitely when if you've got like a back tweak or something, he definitely feels that the
mm,
physical form feels 50, but
mm.
the mental energy doesn't.
I had this MRI done recently after these seizures. And I said to the guy, great photograph you've taken here. Thank you very much. But I said, as a radiologist, what does this mean? And he says, well, it means the scarring in your brain has really, become more solidified. So I said, great. So what does that mean? He said, well, you're never going to stop having seizures. We can just try control them with medication. So
Mm.
I said, like, what does that mean? So it says basically your brain's getting old. So
Mm.
my brain is getting old, but I don't feel that my thinking's aging.
Mm.
Um, and I listen to friends that are older, and God, they're repetitive. And I want to say, and you've told me the story 30 million times, and it's a great question to me to say, well, do I say to this guy or whoever, you've told me the story, or do I just let them ride? And
Yeah. This is interesting because I suspect that there are people who do that all through life. It's not something that comes on them later in life.
exactly, it just expands.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing, actually, I've given that some thought before because I know that my mom was often kind of scolded by the family for repeating her stories again and again, and
Mm,
that in itself is something that I've taken on board, and I almost go the other way, and I try to never repeat myself. But obviously, if you're in a position where you're trying to convey information to people regularly, then the same stories need to be repeated, the same things need to be
mm,
included. And one thing that helped me with that was that I remember someone saying, well, if you think about whatever your favorite band is, or one of, like, the Rolling
mm,
Stones, will say, because they've
mm,
been around forever, and they have been playing those same songs for decades now, and people still want to hear that, and they still get something from it. So that's what I try to keep in mind when I have to do the repeating myself thing.
mm.
Little life
I,
lesson.
I think my brain is definitely getting older. I mean, okay, so let me preface that I've never had a good memory. In my in my childhood, my brother would always say, "You forget everything. You're missing a really good life," and how much of your existence is made up on your perception of past experiences is a very interesting philosophical
Yeah.
question.
Oh, wow. That's definitely part two of this episode, I think. Um,
That is. I'd love to explore that with you. I haven't thought about that
yeah.
much deeply, but in the next couple of minutes, Deirdre, I think it is so interesting to uncover the neurotransmission
Mm,
of longevity and
mm,
what are the neurological markers of
wow.
well-being. And my assumption, and I think it's quite a good assumption, it's related to levels of oxytocin. If you
Mm,
look across blue zones, these people all have a great community of friends. All the old people live near the grandchildren. They kind of scrum down together,
mhm,
which I think is a huge reason for longevity. They
yeah.
all exercise, but they're not excessively exercising. They all eat healthily, but pasta and wine often is part of the deal. So we're not meant to be carb allergic. And maybe we should do some research on the relation between oxytocin and longevity in another
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, and relevance to community. I think that's another really interesting one. I mean, I see this
Mm,
with my gran, who has outlived most of her peers,
right.
and so yeah, there's definitely something in there to talk about.
Mm.
But I know that you have got to go on to meet someone else very shortly, so I want to
Das
say
ist richtig, ja. Das ist gut.
like, thank you so much
No, we
for
could chat
joining me
forever,
today.
Deirdre. We could chat forever. Has anybody ever asked you and your opinion about this? Has anybody dived into your opinion?
Well, actually, the very first episode, we talked about some things collectively with my co-host Martin, and so
Mhm.
it was a bit more pong in that episode, to and fro across the little screen.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, they just, my opinions sort of interfere
Okay.
with other people's conversations
Well,
sometimes.
let's ping and pong in our next call. I look forward to that.
All right. Well, I will end the stream now, and I'll see you on the other side. Thank you,
Thanks so
everybody
much.
who is watching this. Drop us some comments, and we'll get back to you in a while.
Sounds like a good idea. Thanks, Deirdre.